The sound the earth should never make. It was the kind of noise no one should ever hear, like the earth itself exhaling in pain. That's how it began. Not with a storm, not with an omen, but with a sound. On the morning of June 4th, 1901, a cattle farmer just outside the quiet, overlooked town of Dunn Hollow, Illinois, was tending his pasture when the ground opened up. No warning, no tremor, just sudden, collapsing silence, and then a roar as 30 feet of scorched grass and topsoil vanished into the sinkhole. What emerged from beneath wasn't just roots and stone. It was older than that. Stranger. There were beams, rotted and hand-carved. Bricks blackened by heat and time. Fragments of rusted iron. But what caught everyone's attention, what stopped the digging and brought the police, the press, and eventually the silence, were the bones. Human bones. Dozens of them. The first was a jawbone, still locked inside a rusted head brace. Then a rib cage, curved unnaturally inward. And by mid-morning, 7 full skeletons had been retrieved, all adults, all restrained. Bound by metal, wood, or leather straps, fused to whatever they were lying on. But there was no morgue, no marker, no tomb. There wasn't supposed to be anything there at all. They almost stopped the excavation. They almost buried it again. But one of the workers, some say a college student home for the summer, others say a man who had no name on the payroll, kept digging just a little further down. And that's when they found the sign. Corroded, half buried in soot and filth. Barely legible, but the words were unmistakable once cleaned. Riverside Sanatorium, Est. 1871. There were 2 problems with that. 1, there had never been a sanatorium in Dunn Hollow. Not listed in county records. Not on maps. Not in health department archives. Not even in rumor. And 2, no one had ever heard of it. That's where I come in. My name is Daniel Mercer. I've been a journalist for over a decade, mostly infrastructure collapse, corruption cases, the usual bureaucratic rot. But this was different. What happened in Dunn Hollow isn't just a missing building. It's a missing memory. And the further I dug, the more I realized this wasn't just an abandoned hospital. It was something worse, something designed to be forgotten. But it didn't stay buried. And now, I'm going to tell you everything I found, even if it costs me. If you're watching this on Nightmare Hex, then you already know what we explore here. Stories that were never meant to be found. Places erased from maps. Names that dissolve in your mouth when you try to speak them. We don't tell ghost stories. We tell the stories ghosts were made from. And what you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's documentation. By the end of this series, you may not trust your own memories. And maybe you shouldn't. Let's begin. The first official report came from a county surveyor named Whitcomb. In his notes, which were buried in a warehouse until I filed an FOIA request, he described the remains as anomalous. Not because of their number, but because of their condition. No signs of trauma. No tools of surgery. No records of death. Just restraint. As if they'd gone willingly, or at least been made to look like they had. But that wasn't the worst part. Whitcomb had also noted a symbol carved into several of the bricks and burned into the wood. A simple circle, 2 dots, and a horizontal line like a crude face. But always inverted. At first, everyone thought it must have been a Civil War field hospital. Maybe a quarantine site that got left off the books. But the documents didn't support that. In fact, they contradicted it entirely. Between 1870 and 1890, tuberculosis deaths in the surrounding counties showed a consistent footnote. Dece. Under care at RS. That's it. No full names. No discharge records. No obituaries. just initials. That's when the name Riverside started appearing, and then disappearing again. Maps from that era, the kind librarians usually don't pull unless you beg, started showing a little black rectangle just west of Dunn Hollow marked Riverside Sanatorium, TB Ward. It was there in 1874, 1878, and again in 1885. But by 1890, it was gone. Not just gone, erased. The name had been replaced with a handwritten note. Property repurposed. See Index 9A. There was no Index 9A. That was my first hint this wasn't neglect. It was a cover-up. Then I found her. Mrs. Howren, 89 years old. Retired school teacher. Her family had lived in Dunn Hollow for 5 generations. I only got the name from an offhand comment by a town librarian who warned me not to go asking about ghosts. When I sat down with her, she seemed sweet, harmless. But the second I said the name Riverside, her entire demeanor changed. My grandfather used to whisper about that place, she said, eyes narrow. Said it wasn't for healing. Said it listened. When I asked what that meant, she leaned closer. People didn't leave that place. They weren't buried either. They just stopped existing. The phrase chilled me, and it wasn't the last time I'd hear it. I tracked down a set of sealed correspondence at the State Medical Archives in Springfield. The envelope was labeled Confidential Department of Public Charity, 1882. Inside were 3 letters between a man named Dr. Arthur Fenn, a health officer, and someone whose name was redacted. They discussed Riverside in cold, clinical tones, terms like mortality yield and non-compliance rate. One phrase stuck out. If your procedures remain undocumented and unverifiable, this office will move for closure under Article 7, Section 3. That letter was dated March 1883. The reply was a single word. Deferred. That's the last anyone ever heard from Riverside. Officially. But unofficially. That's where it gets disturbing. Because what I found next was not a patient record. It was a set of internship notes. 8 pages, scrawled on university letterhead from the University of Chicago. Written by a medical student named Paul Becker. Dated summer 1883. The first few entries were normal. Observations about treatment routines, diet plans, herbal compresses, the usual. But page 4. That's when the handwriting changed. They call it the reflection chamber, he wrote. No windows. 1 chair. A low tone plays. The patients. Change. Their words don't match their faces. I saw a girl speak German with an Irish accent, then start singing in Latin. Her file says she never learned to read. The final entry was even worse. Just 1 line. They told me I was next. That was the last anyone heard from Paul Becker until 5 months later, when a John Doe was found wandering in Rockford. No memory. No name. Diagnosed with nervous exhaustion and admitted to a state hospital. He died in 1912. The attending physician wrote, forgot how to eat. But it wasn't just him. The university had 1 professor still alive who remembered Becker. Dr. Walter Ulrich, retired neuropathologist. He met with me, reluctantly. When I showed him the name Riverside, his face drained of color. Where did you find that? He asked. I told him everything. Then he pulled out an envelope from a locked drawer. On the front, in fading ink, Riverside 1883, the Mindprint Experiment, do not file. That was the moment I knew I wasn't chasing a ghost story. I was chasing an experiment. One that was still echoing. Inside were patient files. Dozens. All from Riverside. Many had matching names, dates, and diagnoses. But some were identical. Same name. Same symptoms. 4 years apart. Same handwriting. Same doctor. J.F. Julius Fenner. Which meant either someone was forging death records or patients were being recycled. But recycled for what? The final detail in those files wasn't medical. It was symbolic. A little face, the same symbol from the bricks. And beneath each a Latin phrase. Non redibus idem. You will not return the same. That was the moment I realized what Riverside had been doing. They weren't just hiding the dead. They were harvesting them. The hospital that erased you. By the time I reached the University of Chicago Medical Academy, I was already convinced. This wasn't just a lost facility. It was a deliberate deletion. A part of history someone, or something, had worked hard to remove. And yet, pieces still remained. Buried in wrong file drawers, mislabeled maps, hushed memories. All pointing towards something larger than a single hospital. Larger than Dunn Hollow. Larger than anything I had ever investigated. I'd come to meet Dr. Walter Ulrich, a name barely visible in a faded faculty registry from the 1980s. He was long retired, sharp despite his years, and kept an office in the archives wing, a place that smelled like vinegar, disinfectant, and dust. The kind of smell that clings to old paper and older secrets. I expected resistance. What I got was recognition. When I asked him about Riverside, he didn't say a word. He just stood, walked to a locked drawer, and pulled out a sealed envelope. It was yellowed, brittle at the edges. Written across the top in fading black ink. Riverside, 1883. The Mindprint Experiment Internship Notes Do Not File. Inside were 8 handwritten pages on university letterhead. Notes from a student I already knew too well, Paul L. Becker. The early entries were mundane, observations about patient diets, compresses, breathing exercises. But by page 4, the tone shifted. The handwriting slanted. Sentences grew frantic. Crossed out words. Ink blots in the margins. Then came the line that froze me. They call it the reflection chamber. I read those 3 words over and over again. Becker described it as a metal-walled room with no windows and a single chair in the center. Patients were brought in one at a time. Some were told it was for imaging. Others were told it was for prayer. But every one of them came out different. Their voices changed. Their memories scrambled. Becker watched a boy recite the names of streets in a city he had never visited. Another patient screamed in perfect Russian, though her file listed her as illiterate. One man recited scripture backward while drawing symbols in the air. Symbols Becker claimed he'd seen before in his dreams. Day 41. Becker wrote, I asked Dr. Fenner about the tone they played during sessions. He told me it wasn't a tone. It was a memory. Day 43. Patient 12 said he remembered a fire in a town he's never been to. Described the firehouse, the street names. I verified it. Everything matched. Day 47. I don't think the patients are sick. I think they're empty. That final entry. They told me I was next. When I asked Dr. Ulrich what happened to Becker, his face paled. He told me the boy was found wandering the streets of Rockford 5 months later. No memory. No name. He'd been committed as a John Doe and died in 1912 of malnutrition. They said. Ulrich whispered. He forgot how to eat. That should have been the end. But it wasn't. Because Ulrich pulled out one final item. A ledger. Cracked leather. Heavy. Inside. Julius Fenner. Graduate of Heidelberg Medical. Expelled 1866. He showed me the expulsion letter. It cited medically unethical and spiritually corrosive research into consciousness replication. No further comment. No trial. Just a warning. He reappeared in the U.S. 2 years later under an alias. The alias? James Fenner. The location he chose to settle in? Dunn Hollow. But here's what chilled me. The reason for his expulsion wasn't just unethical procedures. It was belief. The faculty report cited an affiliation with a defunct ecclesiastical group, the Brotherhood of St. Malthes. Ulrich lowered his voice when he said it. They believed the soul could be divided, stored, even duplicated, like a manuscript. That night, I couldn't sleep. My hands trembled as I reread the internship notes again and again, each line more erratic than the last. Then, a box arrived. No return address, just a label. St. Joseph's Mercy Archives, Peoria. Inside was a stack of photocopied medical records. Dozens of them, all stamped. Riverside Sanatorium, 1872 to 1883. The names blurred together, patients ranging in age from 8 to 81. Nearly all poor, many without family. Diagnoses were mundane: bronchitis, tuberculosis, fever. But the outcomes were not. Each file ended the same way. Outcome: deceased. Divine reflection therapy. One name repeated: Michael Riener. Died in 1873. Then again in 1877. Same age, same symptoms, same doctor, same death. Then another. Agnes Weller. Died in 1872. Then again in 1875. Again in 1882. It wasn't just recycling names. The files were identical, and at the bottom of each file, the same hand-drawn symbol. A circle, 2 dots, 1 horizontal line, a crude face, always at the bottom right, and beneath it, non redibus idem. You will not return the same. I flipped to the final file. It stopped me cold. Name: Paul L. Becker. Occupation: medical student. Date of admission: February 1883. Diagnosis: nervous collapse. Auditory hallucinations. Outcome: transfer to internal observation. Status: unknown. It wasn't just Becker who witnessed the process. He had become part of it. And the truth, the unbearable truth, was starting to take shape. Riverside hadn't just hidden its victims. It had replicated them. It was a system, a mechanism, a factory for people, for memories, for minds. It wasn't about healing the sick. It was about harvesting the willing or the forgotten and turning them into something else entirely. By the time I reached back out to Dr. Ulrich, he was already gone. Found dead in his sleep. Heart failure, they said. But the last line of the police report chilled me. Witness claims Dr. Ulrich said before collapsing, "It's back, and it remembers me." 2 days later, another package arrived. No name, no return address. Just one phrase typed on a card inside. "You're asking the right questions. Start here." It was signed W. Inside were blueprints. Not of a building, of a facility. Under the soil. Under the pastures of Dunn Hollow. Tunnels. Chambers. Rooms with names like Echo Bay, Tone Calibration, Core Array, and Nexus Room. And one corridor, circled in red. Reflection Chamber. The name from Becker's notes. The same tone played in every file, every room, every scream. Whatever Riverside had been, it hadn't stayed buried. And I was beginning to think it never truly had. The reflection that answered first. When I returned to Dunn Hollow, I wasn't thinking like a journalist anymore. I wasn't even thinking like myself. I had started to dream in someone else's handwriting. I remembered things I hadn't lived. I knew the way to places I'd never been. My memories felt second-hand, like borrowed coats that didn't quite fit. But I had to keep going. Because if I stopped now, I knew what would happen. I would be erased, just like the rest of them. This time, I came with a different kind of map. Not a street map, not a township plat, but a geological survey from 1879, buried in a state archive in Springfield. Unlike the others, this one wasn't made for the public, it was made for engineers. It showed water tables, fault lines, and anomalies. One of them caught my eye. Near the western edge of Dunn Hollow, a faint outline labeled man-made substructure. Unknown purpose. Entry sealed. The coordinates matched the pasture where the sinkhole had opened weeks earlier. That land belonged to a man named Raymond Pike, a third-generation cattle farmer. He'd already seen the excavation. When I told him what I was investigating, he didn't laugh. He just asked if I had a flashlight. We met at dusk. The field was silent. The cows avoided one section of the pasture, curving away instinctively, like they knew. The ground beneath our feet felt wrong. Hollow, but not empty. Raymond stopped near a patch of cracked earth and tapped his boot against a slab. It rang. We cleared the dirt and uncovered an iron ring embedded in stone. A hatch. Together, we pulled it open. A staircase led downward into the dark. The air didn't smell like soil. It smelled sterile, artificial, processed, colder than it should have been. As we descended, the light thinned until it collapsed completely, swallowed by the blackness below. Our flashlights cut narrow beams across corroded brass plates and exposed conduit piping. And then, a word, etched into the wall above the corridor. Depth of internal reflection. Corridor C. This doesn't look like a hospital, Raymond muttered. It wasn't. It was a machine. We moved deeper. Pipes hissed faintly with ancient air. Doors lined the corridor, warped shut with rust and time. But one opened. Behind it was a room, square, sterile, unmarked, filled with what could only be described as instruments. Not 19th century medical gear. Not even early 20th. These were machines that didn't belong in any timeline I knew. Panels with knobs labeled tone variants. Dials etched with strange glyphs, glass tubes filled with long-dried fluids. Some markings weren't in English. Some weren't even in Roman script. One of the floor grates beneath us clanged as Raymond stepped on it. Hollow underneath. More levels. More rooms. We moved on. The next door was labeled simply 3. It led to a narrow amphitheater, a semicircular lecture hall surrounding a single sunken pit. At the center, one chair. Suspended above it, a lattice of copper and glass. 4 massive speaker cones, each mounted to a wall, all pointing inward. It wasn't a classroom. It was a calibration chamber. A small panel on the wall read, Session 94B. Stimulus frequency, 412 Hz. Duration, 43 minutes. Result, partial overwrite achieved. Memory lattice unstable. I didn't want to know what that meant. But I already did. They weren't trying to heal memory. They were trying to replace it. Then I saw it. A message carved into the floor near the chair, not by machine, but by hand. Deep grooves. Fingernails. Maybe something sharper. I saw her face. Then it became mine. We pressed on. The dormitory was next. Dozens of narrow cots in rows. Each bolted to the floor. Each fitted with leather straps. But what caught my attention were the plates. Black ceramic. Mounted above every bed, each facing the same direction, toward a blank wall. When I stepped into that space, my flashlight flickered once. Then again. And died. Raymond's didn't. You felt that? I asked. He nodded, pale. Like something pulling behind my eyes. We didn't talk after that. Not when we passed a sealed cabinet filled with mounted human teeth. Not when we saw the mural scratched into the wall of another chamber, a face split in two, one side smiling, the other crying, both bleeding from the ears. And not when we found the first nameplate. It had fallen beside a rusted desk. Dr. J. Fenner, Internal Direction Counsel. Next to it, a clipboard with a form. Only one question. How many versions of yourself would you tolerate? If none were truly you. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because that question had already begun to apply. Every hallway deepened. Every step felt like I was shedding something. Not weight, not warmth, identity. We entered a room labeled Registry and Orientation. It resembled an intake office. A long wooden counter separated a dusty waiting area from a wall of filing drawers. One warped placard hung above the counter. Welcome to Riverside. Your healing begins today. That phrase returned over and over in the files we found. Voluntary consent is the first step toward enlightenment, but the signatures didn't match the sentiment. Most were crude, shaky. Some were just thumbprints in red. Others weren't signed at all. Behind one cabinet, buried in dust, we found a journal labeled Cohort 7 Intake Roster. It listed subject codes instead of names. Apparent age, compliance score, suggested tone. But one column broke me. Reusability score. No symptoms. No care plan. Just ratings. For recycling. They never volunteered. Raymond whispered. I nodded. No, they were chosen. Another canvas chart showed concentric rings, labeled entry, dissolution, alignment, replication, integration. At the center, your mind is no longer yours. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Because I knew now, Riverside wasn't a hospital. It was a mechanism. A machine built not to heal people, but to overwrite them. To strip identity like skin. And somewhere deeper, beyond the dorms, beyond the records, the tone waited. Waiting to be heard again. The more Daniel dug into the history of Riverside Sanatorium, the more he felt as if he was peeling back layers of a nightmare that no one wanted to face. The black rectangle on the old map, the one no official records could confirm, continued to haunt his thoughts. It wasn't just a place. It was a secret whispered in the shadows of the town's forgotten past. The air around Riverside seemed thick with silence, a silence heavy enough to smother the truth. One chilly autumn evening, Daniel stood by the rusted gates of what should have been Riverside Sanatorium. Yet all he saw was a dense thicket of overgrown trees and collapsed ruins, swallowed by nature's relentless grasp. There was no hospital here anymore, or at least, nothing that matched the descriptions he'd uncovered. It was as if Riverside had never existed at all, yet its name lingered stubbornly on the edges of old maps and the corners of forgotten memories. He turned on his flashlight, sweeping the beam over the rubble that once might have been walls and corridors. A chill ran down his spine as the beam caught something, a patch of ground strangely bare amid the overgrowth, as if someone had disturbed the earth recently. He knelt down, fingers brushing against a small, corroded metal box buried just beneath the surface. Inside were brittle yellowed papers, fragile as autumn leaves, each one scrawled with names, dates, and cryptic notes. What struck Daniel was a recurring phrase that appeared next to many patients' names. Deceased under treatment. No remains found. The words echoed in his mind. How could someone die and yet leave no trace? It was a question that unsettled him deeply, gnawing at the edges of his rational mind. Back home, Daniel began cross-referencing the names in the box with death certificates and census records. Many of the individuals had vanished without explanation, listed as missing or presumed dead. their fates lost to time. There were no graves, no obituaries, just a void where their lives should have ended. Driven by a mix of fascination and dread, Daniel reached out to a local historian, Evelyn Marks, who had spent decades researching the town's dark past. Evelyn's house was filled with stacks of dusty books, yellowed newspapers, and photographs faded with age. When he showed her the papers, Evelyn's usually calm demeanor shifted into something more somber, almost fearful. "This," she said slowly, turning over one of the fragile sheets, "is proof that Riverside Sanatorium wasn't just a hospital. It was something else. Something no one talks about." Her voice dropped to a whisper. There were rumors of experiments, of treatments that went beyond medicine. Some say it was a place where the sick were subjected to cruel tests, disappearing without a trace. Daniel pressed her for details. Evelyn explained that in the late 19th century, tuberculosis was a terrifying plague, and many sanatoriums across the country tried desperate measures to combat it. Riverside, however, was rumored to have been involved in clandestine research, possibly even occult rituals disguised as medical treatments. Local folklore spoke of patients who vanished and voices heard at night, a hospital that existed only in the collective nightmare of the town. Evelyn handed Daniel an old journal she'd found in the town archives. The leather cover was cracked, pages brittle, and filled with a mixture of medical notes and strange symbols. The journal belonged to a Dr. Alfred Crane, the last known physician at Riverside Sanatorium, before it closed abruptly in 1890. Daniel read late into the night, captivated and horrified by Crane's words. The doctor's entry spoke of experiments on the patient's minds, attempts to harness what he called the hidden sickness that went beyond tuberculosis, a disease that consumed not only the body but the soul. There were references to shadows in the hospital halls, voices calling patients into darkness, and patients who returned different, hollow-eyed and silent. One entry stood out. "The disease is not merely physical. It dwells in the unseen, feeding on fear and despair. My treatments must go beyond the flesh, into the realm of the mind, where true healing or destruction awaits." Riverside is no longer just a sanatorium. It is a gateway. Daniel's heart pounded as he read the last entries. Dr. Crane wrote of a final experiment, one that would open the doors to what lies beyond and bring the suffering to a new existence. The entries ended abruptly, ink smeared, as if written in a hurry or under duress. Haunted by these revelations, Daniel decided to explore the ruins again, this time at night. Something about the doctor's words had stirred a restless energy. He hoped to find any remnants of the gateway Crane mentioned. Under the pale light of the moon, Daniel approached the site. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant rustling of leaves. He carried the journal and his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. As he walked through the remains, he noticed strange symbols etched faintly into the broken bricks and twisted metal, symbols that matched those in Crane's journal. The air grew colder, and a faint humming vibrated beneath his feet, as if the ground itself was alive. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and died. Panic surged through Daniel as he fumbled to turn it back on. In the brief moment of darkness, he thought he heard whispers, unintelligible but urgent. When the light steadied, he saw a shadow shift just beyond the trees, a figure tall and gaunt, standing perfectly still. Daniel called out, voice trembling. No response. The figure vanished. Breathing heavily, Daniel backed away, his mind racing with fear and questions. Had the doctor's gateway been real? Had he crossed into something that shouldn't exist? Back in town, Daniel's obsession grew. He found more accounts of Riverside, hidden in old diaries and letters, stories of patients who returned from the sanatorium changed, some claiming to see shadows that followed them home. The townsfolk avoided talking about Riverside, their faces tightening at the mention of the name, as if invoking a curse. One elderly woman, Agnes, finally broke her silence when Daniel visited her. She had lived in the town her entire life and remembered her grandmother warning her never to approach the old hospital grounds. They said the sanatorium was cursed, Agnes whispered, eyes darting nervously. Those who went in never truly came back. They said the sickness ate their souls. She handed Daniel a faded photograph of a group of patients standing outside Riverside, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow. Among them, a boy whose eyes seemed to follow Daniel's every move. Daniel felt a cold shiver run down his spine. As he pieced together these fragments, the true horror of Riverside Sanatorium began to take shape, not just a place of physical suffering, but a dark nexus where the boundaries between the living and something else had been torn apart. Determined to uncover the final truth, Daniel planned one last visit to the ruins. Armed with a journal, the photograph, and a voice recorder, he wanted to document any signs of the supernatural. That night, the ruins welcomed him like a dark maw, swallowing him into its silent depths. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly under the moonlight. As he walked deeper, the air thickened and the temperature dropped sharply. He set up the recorder near a crumbling archway, speaking aloud into the cold night. "Is anyone here? I'm looking for answers." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, the faintest whisper reached his ears, a voice barely audible, calling his name. His heart hammered as the whisper grew louder, echoing through the ruins, a chorus of lost souls. The voice led him to an old, collapsed stairwell. Descending carefully, Daniel found himself in a hidden basement, an underground chamber lined with ancient symbols and strange devices long rusted by time. In the center, a stone altar stained with dark, dried marks. As he touched it, a sudden rush of visions overwhelmed him, flashes of patients screaming, of shadows writhing in the darkness, and Dr. Crane's final experiment opening a portal between worlds. Daniel stumbled back, gasping for air. The voice whispered again, "They never left. They are waiting." Fleeing the ruins, Daniel knew he had uncovered something far worse than any disease, a lingering evil born from desperation and madness. And Riverside Sanatorium was still alive, in a way no one dared to admit. After fleeing the ruins that night, Daniel barely slept. The visions from the underground chamber clawed at his mind, relentless and vivid. Faces contorted in agony, shadowy figures that seemed to seep from the walls, and Dr. Crane's whispered warnings all replayed in his thoughts like a twisted lullaby. The boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving him uncertain whether the horrors he saw were real or some cruel trick of his own imagination. Despite the terror, Daniel's obsession deepened. He felt compelled to understand what had happened at Riverside Sanatorium, driven by a mixture of fear, curiosity, and a strange sense of responsibility. It was as if the lost souls he glimpsed in that chamber were pleading for him to tell their story. Daniel returned to Evelyn Marks with the voice recordings and the journal, hoping she could help make sense of what he'd uncovered. Evelyn listened quietly to the whispers caught on tape, her face growing pale as the ghostly voices filled her dimly lit study. When the last whisper faded, she sighed deeply. "This is no ordinary haunting," she said. "It's a tether, a bond between our world and whatever lies beyond." Riverside was more than a sanatorium. It was a portal. The experiments Dr. Crane conducted didn't just cure or kill. They opened a gateway to a realm of shadows. The patients didn't simply die. They were trapped somewhere else. Daniel's hand shook. Trapped? Where? Evelyn hesitated, then pulled out a brittle map of the town, annotated with strange symbols matching those in the journal. She traced a circle around Riverside and several other locations nearby. There are legends about a place they call the Hollow, an invisible pocket of darkness beneath the town. It's said to be a prison for restless spirits, a realm between life and death. The final experiment must have ruptured the veil, trapping those patients in the hollow. But the portal wasn't sealed properly. Some of them still reached back, trying to cross over. Daniel's mind raced. The idea of an unseen prison beneath the town was terrifying, and explained the vanished patients with no remains found. They weren't buried in any cemetery because their bodies never fully returned from that dark realm. Evelyn warned Daniel against further exploration, but he couldn't stop. The pieces of the puzzle called to him, demanding answers no one else dared seek. That night, he returned to the ruins with a plan to record everything, hoping the technology might capture evidence of the supernatural presence. He set up cameras and motion sensors around the perimeter, positioning them to capture the faintest movement or sound. He placed salt circles around the entrance, an old folk remedy said to ward off spirits, and carried a small vial of holy water, a gesture of protection more for his own comfort than belief. As the hours passed, the silence thickened. Then, just before dawn, the sensors triggered, recording a low hum that grew into a chorus of whispers. The cameras flickered, capturing fleeting shadows darting through the trees, shapes that vanished when illuminated by his flashlight. Daniel's breath caught as a chilling voice, distant but clear, spoke his name again. He followed the sound deeper into the ruins, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled. Dust and debris rained down as the earth seemed to open, revealing a narrow stairway descending into darkness, the same hidden entrance he had found days earlier. Compelled beyond reason, Daniel stepped inside. The air grew cold and stale as he descended into the depths of the hollow. Flickering torchlight illuminated walls covered in ancient symbols that pulsed with an otherworldly glow. Daniel's footsteps echoed in the silence, each step taking him further from the world he knew. At the bottom, he entered a vast chamber filled with strange machinery, twisted metal and glass tubes, corroded by time, but still humming faintly. In the center, a massive portal shimmered, its surface rippling like liquid shadow. As he approached, the portal flared to life, revealing glimpses of a nightmarish landscape beyond. Twisted trees with gnarled branches reaching like claws, a sky perpetually roiling with storm clouds, and shadowy figures that lurked just out of sight. Daniel realized with horror that this was the prison Dr. Crane's experiment had opened, a place where the patient's souls were trapped, caught between worlds. He could feel their despair seeping through the portal, a cold sorrow that threatened to consume him. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber, deep and commanding, a presence that was not human. "You should not have come here," it intoned. "The balance has been disturbed." Daniel's blood ran cold. The presence identified itself as a guardian of the hollow, tasked with preventing the souls trapped within from escaping and consuming the living world. The final experiment had weakened the barriers, and now the trapped spirits were restless, seeking release. The guardian warned Daniel that attempting to close the portal would be dangerous, could trap him forever in the hollow, or unleash horrors beyond imagination. But ignoring the problem would allow the darkness to spread, threatening the entire town. Faced with impossible choices, Daniel knew he had to act. He decided to seek out any descendants of Dr. Crane or survivors connected to Riverside, hoping they might hold clues to safely sealing the portal. His search led him to an old mansion on the outskirts of town, home to one of Crane's last living relatives, a reclusive woman named Lillian Crane. She had spent her life haunted by the family legacy, guarding secrets passed down through generations. Lillian revealed that Dr. Crane had left behind a hidden codex, a book containing the rituals and knowledge needed to close the Hollow's gateway. However, the codex was incomplete, and parts of it were scattered across the town, lost to time. Together, Daniel and Lillian embarked on a perilous hunt for the missing pages. Each piece brought them closer to the truth, but also deeper into danger. Strange phenomena followed them, shadows that whispered threats, objects moving on their own, and the ever-present feeling of unseen eyes watching their every move. One night, as they examined a faded page in an abandoned church, the temperature plummeted and ghostly figures materialized around them. The spirits of Riverside's patients, trapped and desperate, reached out with silent screams. Daniel and Lillian barely escaped, shaken but more determined than ever. As they pieced together the codex, it became clear that the ritual to close the portal required a sacrifice, a willing soul to act as a seal, holding back the darkness at great personal cost. Daniel grappled with the weight of this revelation. The choice was his: save the town by risking his own life or abandon the trapped souls to their eternal torment. The line between courage and madness blurred as he prepared for the final confrontation with the Hollow. On the night of the ritual, Daniel and Lillian returned to the ruins. The portal pulsed violently, as if sensing the impending closure. The ground trembled, shadows swirling like living smoke. Daniel began the incantation, voice steady despite the terror clawing at his chest. The portal screamed in defiance, spectral hands reaching out to grasp him, begging for freedom. With the last words, a brilliant light exploded from the altar, engulfing the chamber. Daniel felt himself pulled toward the portal, the cold darkness trying to claim him. But then, a calm warmth spread through his body, and the portal snapped shut like a shuttered eye. Silence returned, heavy and profound. Exhausted but alive, Daniel emerged from the ruins at dawn. The oppressive darkness had lifted, replaced by the first light of a new day. The town was safe for now. Yet Daniel knew the horrors of Riverside Sanatorium would never truly fade. The Hollow remained, a dark scar beneath the earth, waiting for the next breach. And some doors are never meant to be opened. Days after the ritual, Daniel felt a strange emptiness inside him, as though a part of his soul had been left behind in that shadowed realm. The town, bathed now in sunlight and calm, seemed oblivious to the darkness that had almost swallowed it whole. People went about their daily lives, unaware of the thin veil that had nearly been torn apart beneath their feet. But Daniel's life had changed irreversibly. He was haunted not only by memories of Riverside Sanatorium and the Hollow, but also by an unsettling sense that something still lingered within him. The shadows that had clawed at the portal had not vanished completely. They had followed him back. At night, his dreams were invaded by visions of twisted corridors and desperate faces. Whispered voices echoed through the darkness, calling him back to a place between worlds. Sometimes, Daniel awoke gasping, his heart pounding as cold fingers seemed to grip his very soul. The experience blurred the boundary between waking and sleep, dragging him into a twilight existence where reality was uncertain. Unable to shake the feeling, Daniel sought out Evelyn Marks again, hoping her wisdom could shed light on what he was enduring. Evelyn listened carefully as he recounted his nightmares and the shadowy presence that seemed to trail him. "This is the price of crossing into the Hollow," she said gravely. "When you touch the realm of the lost souls, a part of that darkness can cling to you. It feeds on fear and loneliness, growing stronger in the quiet moments." Daniel realized that closing the portal had not fully severed the connection. It had merely sealed the gateway, but the echoes remained. Evelyn suggested a cleansing ritual, an ancient practice to purge lingering spirits and protect the living from their influence. She warned it would be difficult and required great mental strength. Daniel agreed. Together, they prepared the ritual in Evelyn's home, filling the room with protective symbols and burning sage to purify the air. As they began, Daniel felt the presence grow restless, resisting the cleansing like a living thing desperate to survive. During the ceremony, shadows twisted around him, voices pleading and threatening in a chaotic symphony. For a moment, Daniel felt himself slipping, drawn toward the darkness that had once nearly claimed him. But with Evelyn's guidance and his own determination, he pushed back, reclaiming his mind and spirit. When the ritual ended, the oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a fragile peace. Despite the relief, Daniel knew this was only the beginning. The mysteries of Riverside Sanatorium and the Hollow were far from over. As the weeks passed, strange occurrences in the town increased, pets disappearing, flickering lights, unexplained cold spots. Old residents whispered of a curse returning, shadows gathering at the edges of perception. Daniel and Evelyn began to investigate, piecing together a disturbing pattern. It seemed that although the portal was closed, the darkness it unleashed had seeped into the town's very foundation. The Hollow's influence was spreading, corrupting the land and its people. Their research uncovered a chilling theory. The sanatorium's experiments had fractured the veil not just once, but repeatedly. The Hollow was a wound in reality, slowly widening with each attempt to control the unseen forces. Desperate for answers, Daniel turned to Lillian Crane again. Together, they searched for a way to heal the rift permanently. Lillian revealed a hidden chamber beneath her mansion, containing artifacts from Dr. Crane's work, crystal shards, ancient tomes, and a strange device resembling a compass, but etched with arcane symbols. She believed the device could help locate the deepest point of the Hollow's influence, where the darkness originated and where they might seal the wound for good. Equipped with the device, Daniel and Lillian ventured beyond the town's limits, into dense forests where the air grew unnaturally cold and the trees seemed to whisper warnings. The compass pulsed and spun wildly, leading them deeper into the wilderness until they reached a forgotten clearing. There, the earth was cracked and blackened, as if scorched by an invisible fire. At the center lay a fissure, a gaping maw opening into shadow. As they approached, the fissure pulsed with dark energy, tendrils of smoke-like darkness reaching toward them. The Hollow was alive, a wound in the fabric of the world that hungered for release. Daniel felt the weight of the town's fate pressing down on him. He knew that this confrontation would test every ounce of his courage and strength. With Lillian's help, he prepared to perform a ritual drawn from the Codex, a ceremony designed to bind the wound and restore balance. As the ritual began, the shadows surged, fighting against the light Daniel and Lillian summoned. The air crackled with energy, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Voices, anguished, angry, lost, rose in a deafening roar, a chorus of the trapped souls desperate for freedom. Daniel stood firm, chanting the incantation, feeling the power of the ritual coursing through him. The fissure resisted, but with each word, the darkness receded, the tendrils shrinking back into the abyss. Suddenly, a spectral figure appeared, Dr. Crane himself, or the twisted echo of him, caught between worlds. His eyes glowed with madness, and he reached out, trying to disrupt the ritual. Daniel confronted the apparition, demanding it to cease. With a surge of will, he pushed the specter back into the fissure as the ritual reached its climax. A brilliant light exploded from the ground, sealing the fissure with a shockwave that sent Daniel and Lillian sprawling. When the dust settled, the clearing was still. The oppressive darkness had vanished, replaced by a peaceful silence. Daniel realized that the wound had been healed, the balance restored, for now. Returning to town, they found the strange phenomena fading. The cold spots disappeared, pets returned, and the town slowly began to breathe again. But Daniel understood that the Hollow was a scar on reality, a reminder of humanity's dangerous curiosity and the thin line between healing and harm. He vowed to keep watch, knowing that some darkness never truly dies, it only waits. The days following the sealing of the fissure brought an uneasy calm to the town. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy, but Daniel knew better than to trust appearances. The darkness might have been pushed back, but scars like the Hollow never truly vanish. They only simmer beneath the surface, waiting for a moment of weakness to resurface. Daniel threw himself into research once more, poring over every document, diary, and fragment of memory related to Riverside Sanatorium. He felt the weight of those lost souls as a personal burden, people who had vanished from history, trapped in a liminal space between life and death. One particular discovery unsettled him deeply. A set of old newspaper clippings describing strange disappearances over the decades, children, travelers, even a local sheriff, vanishing near the old sanatorium site. The official records dismissed these as accidents or runaways, but Daniel suspected the truth was far more sinister. He reached out to the town's elders, hoping to find anyone with direct memories or family stories linked to Riverside. It was during one such visit that he met Margaret, a frail woman whose eyes held the weight of secrets. Margaret's family had been caretakers of the sanatorium's grounds for generations. She spoke of nights when the hospital's lights flickered mysteriously, of voices calling through the fog, and of shadows that slip between the trees. "I lost my brother there," she whispered. "He was never the same after. He talked about voices and dreams of a dark place beneath the earth. I think he was caught between worlds." Her story echoed Daniel's own experiences, confirming that Riverside's legacy was more than myth. But Margaret also warned of something darker, a force she called the Watcher. According to local lore, the Watcher was an entity born from the hollow itself, a guardian twisted by time into a malevolent presence that stalked the border between realms. It punished those who dared to meddle with the balance. Daniel felt a chill at the thought. Had the Watcher been the shadowy figure he glimpsed that night in the ruins? Was it still watching him, waiting for a moment to strike? Determined to learn more, Daniel and Evelyn scoured the archives for any mention of the Watcher. They found fragmented accounts, strange symbols carved into trees, unexplained disappearances, and fleeting glimpses of a dark silhouette with glowing eyes. Their research suggested that the Watcher was bound to the Fisher's energy, feeding on fear and the souls trapped in the hollow. While the ritual had sealed the portal, it might have also given birth to this guardian, an eternal sentinel enforcing the barrier between worlds. Daniel realized that defeating or appeasing the Watcher was crucial to preventing further tragedies. As he delved deeper, Daniel's own body began to betray him. Strange marks appeared on his skin, thin, web-like scars that pulsed faintly at night. His dreams grew darker, filled with the Watcher's gaze, a cold presence that seemed to invade his very thoughts. Despite the warnings, Daniel refused to back down. One evening, a sudden power outage plunged the town into darkness. Daniel took this as a sign and set out toward the ruins once more. Armed with talismans, Evelyn had prepared for protection. Under the starless sky, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The air seemed to hum with unseen energy. As Daniel neared the old sanatorium grounds, a shadow detached itself from the surrounding darkness. The Watcher, tall and indistinct with eyes burning like embers, it moved with unnatural grace and silence. Its presence was overwhelming, a crushing force that bent the air and warped reality. Daniel felt fear rise like a tidal wave, but steadied himself, clutching the talismans and reciting protective prayers. The Watcher regarded him, its voice a low, echoing whisper that seemed to vibrate inside his skull. "You carry the mark," it said. "The boundary is fragile. You cannot undo what was done." Daniel replied firmly, "I won't let this darkness claim more lives. There has to be a way to end this." The Watcher's gaze pierced him, and Daniel felt memories not his own flood his mind, visions of ancient rites, sacrifices, and the endless cycle of darkness and light. It spoke again. Balance must be preserved. The hollow's gate must remain closed. But you bear the burden of those who came before. In a sudden, whirlwind motion, the Watcher vanished, leaving behind a lingering chill. Daniel understood. The Watcher was both a protector and a prison guard, bound to ensure the darkness never broke free, but also a reminder of the cost. Returning home, Daniel's resolve hardened. The battle against the Hollow and its guardians was far from over. He needed allies, knowledge, and strength beyond anything he had before. That night, he reached out to paranormal investigators and occult scholars, hoping to build a coalition to face the growing threat. Meanwhile, strange reports began to surface around the town. Glowing eyes in the forest, strange symbols appearing on doors, and whispered warnings carried by the wind. The Hollow's influence was stirring once again, threatening to unravel the fragile peace. Daniel's journey was becoming a race against time, a fight to protect not only his town, but the very fabric of reality from unraveling into darkness. The days that followed felt like walking on the edge of a razor. The town, once peaceful, now simmered with unease. The whispers of the Hollow had grown louder, slipping into the dreams and waking moments of its residents. Shadows flickered at the corner of vision, and the chill of something unseen gnawed at the bones of the place Daniel had fought so hard to protect. Daniel's call for help was answered. A small group of paranormal experts and occult scholars arrived, each carrying their own scars from encounters with the unknown. They joined forces, combining ancient knowledge and modern technology to prepare for what Daniel feared might be the final confrontation. Their base of operations was an old church at the town center, its high ceilings and stained glass windows casting eerie colors over their grim work. They pored over Dr. Crane's codex, cross-referencing the rituals and symbols with folklore from around the world. Patterns emerged, warnings about the delicate balance between worlds, the consequences of human hubris, and the guardians set to enforce that balance. The Watcher, they learned, was more than a sentinel. It was a manifestation of the Hollow's will, an entity that could not be reasoned with, only confronted. Daniel's mark had spread subtly, faint, and almost invisible, but it connected him to the Hollow in a way none of them fully understood. The group theorized it was both a curse and a key, binding him to the fate of the town, and possibly the only way to close the dark wound forever. As the full moon rose, a night heavy with portent, they prepared to return to the fissure, armed with talismans, protective circles, and the knowledge gained from the codex. The plan was clear but perilous. Perform a binding ritual to seal the Hollow completely and banish the Watcher, freeing the trapped souls and restoring the town's peace. The air was thick with tension as they approached the scarred clearing deep in the forest. The fissure pulsed ominously, black tendrils of shadow twisting like living smoke. The ground beneath their feet seemed unstable, and every breath tasted of cold ash. The Watcher emerged without warning, its eyes blazing with fury. It moved like a storm, relentless, unyielding, and utterly inhuman. The group formed their protective circle, chanting incantations that resonated with the power of ages. The air crackled as light and shadow clashed in an invisible battle. Daniel stepped forward, feeling the weight of the mark burning faintly on his skin. With every word of the ritual, he felt the bond tighten, like chains both binding and protecting him. The Watcher lashed out, a force of darkness that threatened to consume everything. But the group held fast, their combined strength pushing back. In a final surge, Daniel reached deep within himself, tapping into the very essence of the Hollow that lingered inside him. He offered himself as the final seal, a willing vessel to hold back the darkness forever. A blinding light erupted, swallowing the Watcher and the fissure in a storm of energy that shook the forest to its roots. When the light faded, silence reigned. Daniel collapsed, exhausted but alive. The town's curse was broken. Over the following days, the oppressive shadows lifted. The air felt lighter, and the sun seemed to shine with renewed warmth. The Hollow's grip was gone, but Daniel knew his sacrifice came at a cost. The mark on his skin remained, a reminder that even in victory, darkness leaves its scars. He vowed to protect the town, to watch over the fragile boundary between worlds, knowing that some doors, once opened, can never be truly closed. and that in every shadow lies a story waiting to be told.